and welcome to The Bookshelf, a series brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, where we look at books pertinent to the study of contemporary South Asia. In this episode, we will be discussing the book Kathmandu Dilemma, Resetting India-Nepal Ties, with its author, Ambassador Ranjit Rae. Ambassador Rae is a former Indian diplomat with over 30 years of experience in the Indian Foreign Service, which includes participation in complex negotiations, both at bilateral and multilateral levels, and extensive work in conflict areas and crisis situations. He has since held various positions in international and state organizations. In his past role as a Joint Secretary, North, at the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, Ambassador Rae was closely associated with the development of the 12-point agreement signed in 2005 in New Delhi between then Seven-Party Alliance of Nepal and the CPM Maoist, whose efforts culminated in the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in 2006. Until early 2017, Mr. Rae was the ambassador of India to Nepal, using his tenure to revitalize the bilateral relationship and to actively work on the implementation of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement with Nepali political leaders and other stakeholders. Today, Ambassador Rae will be in conversation with Mr. Kosh Raj Koirala, a Kathmandu-based journalist with nearly 2 decades-long experience in journalism. He is currently serving as Associate Editor of Republica English Daily, and mainly covers issues related to politics and foreign affairs. Prior to joining Republica Daily in 2009, Mr. Koirala worked with the Kathmandu Post for 5 years. We welcome you both to the Bookshelf.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for joining us today. So last time also I had an opportunity to talk to you about the same book, and I'm really happy that I have a second opportunity to talk to you. So Ambassador Rae, I just want to begin asking you to explain our audience the factor that motivated you to write this book, some triggering points. Yeah. And also I want to add, like, a section of critique in Nepal have also raised question about the title itself, Kathmandu Dilemma. They kind of, say that it's not the Kathmandu Dilemma, it's rather Delhi's dilemma. So what do you have to say on this? Over to you, Ambassador Rae.
Well, thank you. And, it's a pleasure to be on this program. Why I wrote the book? I think a couple of reasons. First, since I was, I had a great view of major, transformational events in Nepal. So this is part of Nepal's contemporary history. I thought it's important to record it and, put it down for posterity. Second, I think in Nepal, there are a lot of misperceptions about India's role and approach to some of these seminal developments. And I wanted to clarify, I wanted to explain to people what India's thinking was, what were the options before us, what were the circumstances at the time, why did we decide to, select a certain policy approach. So that was another important element. And finally, I think, I've written this book from an Indian perspective, and I wanted the Indian public, we also have a lot of misperceptions about Nepal. There are sort of standard views about Nepal, small country, Hindu state, and so on. Some of it is patronizing. And I wanted to clarify to the Indian people about this great country, its great diversity, and the aspirations of its people. So I think broadly, these were the factors that motivated me to write the book. On the title of the book, it's written from an Indian perspective. So actually it is, and I agree with some of the critics who said it's India's dilemma. It is India's Kathmandu dilemma. And what is this dilemma? So, the dilemma is that, we have several objectives in Nepal. Being a very close neighboring country with open borders, one of the objectives is that there should be stability and security in Nepal. And that requires a certain policy approach in terms of our support, for instance, to an inclusive constitution. And this became very controversial in Nepal, and there was a pushback, and that's where the China factor comes in. So that's another objective that we are somewhat apprehensive about the Chinese role in Nepal and implications for India. So, you're constantly juggling with these objectives, which sometimes lead to contradictory or, strategy approaches. So this is the dilemma that policymakers face. And I wanted to give a flavor of this to the reading public, that, how decisions are made in India on some of these very, very important issues.
Yeah, thank you. And this has been like a really interesting book. In fact, I read, twice already. And again, I think I should read again. Because, it just, gives us a lot of ideas about the intricacies of our politics and how we are actually, passing through the difficulties vis-a-vis our two neighbors. So it is also there. So I just want to go back to your tenure as Joint Secretary in North, because you have written throughout the book of the challenge to India posed by Communist Party to party ties between Nepalese left and China's left party. When you were Joint Secretary in North, which in 2005 you were overseeing like Nepal and I think Bhutan. So wasn't this envisaged in India? So when India brokered 12-point agreement between mainstream political parties and then Maoist rebel in Delhi, wasn't the China factor properly analyzed? So what do you share on this?
Well, one or two clarifications. The peace process and the 12-point agreement was an agreement between Nepalese parties. India had no direct involvement in it. India, of course, supported it and facilitated it. But it was basically an agreement that was owned and drawn up by the Nepalese political parties and the Maoist insurgents at that time. Secondly, China in 2005 was very different from the China of today. It was, I think at that time, people spoke about the rise of China. But, this whole strategy of bide your time and hide your teeth was very much prevalent. So China at that time did not appear to have a very significant role in Nepalese politics, though of course in the past it had during the Panchayat period, in the King Mahendra's time. So China was at that point in time not such an important factor. Third point, our sense was that the Maoists of Nepal, though they used the term Maoists, it was more a homegrown movement, like the Naxal extreme left movement of India. And our biggest concerns, the security concerns at that time was that, if the Maoists of Nepal capture state power and then link up with the Naxal elements, the leftist Maoist elements of India, then that will really create huge security problems for India. So, and that was a time when a lot of people were being killed in Nepal. So I think the focus at that time was to see how this Maoist insurgency, which eventually claimed 17,000 innocent lives in Nepal, how is this to be brought to an end? And, our assessment at that time was that, there was a military stalemate. The Royal Nepalese Army and the Maoist PLA were in a stalemate. Secondly, the king was trying to take over all executive power. And, he was trying to get rid of multi-party democracy and the political parties. Our sense was that, ideally, if the monarchy and the parties had worked together to combat the Maoists, was the ideal situation. But, if the king is trying to fight both with the Maoists and political parties at the same time, it's going to be very, very difficult. So India wanted to support multi-party democracy in Nepal and at the same time resolve the problem of the insurgency. And that is why this process of a dialogue between the parties and the Maoists began. And, they had a common enemy in this autocratic monarch at that time. So, that is the way this whole process developed. And I think for India at that point in time, China was not such a major factor. The major factor was the huge security concerns due to the Maoist insurgency.
Okay, thank you for that. So I think as an ambassador, you served Nepal in a very, very difficult period. It was, I would say, it was very critical time also. So during your tenure, like Nepalese, they call blockade, and India, of course, it says that it was border disruption caused by the agitating Madhesi party. So this was the time when Nepal was passing through a painful process of promulgating constitution. So in light of the fact that India has only noted the constitution, as you mentioned that India always wanted to ensure the participation of all groups of people in the constitution drafting process. So India so far has only noted the constitution and never welcomed it. So do you think the present constitution of Nepal is set and stable? Has India fully accepted Nepali constitution? So what is your observation?
You have to look at the circumstances in which the constitution was adopted. See, the constitution was supposed to accommodate the aspirations of all sections of society, of this very diverse society of Nepal. And there had been solemn agreements signed by various governments of Nepal, with the Maoists, with the Madhesis, with the Janjatis. And the expectation was that this would be an inclusive constitution because it was written by elected representatives of the people, and it would accommodate aspirations of all sections of society. And many of these agreements that had been signed between the government of Nepal and agitating parties, in one way or the other, India had been associated with these events. You referred to the peace process. There was also the Madhesi agitation. So the expectation was that the new constitution would be progressive, would be inclusive, would give equal representation to diverse communities. And I think while this drafting process was on, there was a sense that the progressive elements, that is the factors of inclusion in the constitution and representation, were kind of rolled back from what had been agreed earlier and incorporated in the interim constitution. And that is why there was a lot of turmoil while all this was happening. So, there was agitations, there were people getting killed. And of course, and that was also the time when the great earthquake happened. So the political parties decided to really rush this process forward without accommodating the diverse aspirations. As a result of which there were all the problems, and you refer to the so-called blockade. So all these problems started. So this is the context in which India was viewing the constitution, and our sense, at that time was that this will not lead to political stability and security in Nepal. That the only way for long-term stability is if the aspirations of all sections of society are accommodated. And the sections of the society are very large. It's one third diversity in the country. So that was our sense and that was our understanding. Of course, now it's 5 years, 6 years since the constitution was adopted. So I think it's now really not relevant in terms of how India looks at it. It is a constitution that has been adopted by the government of Nepal. It is working, though, of course, I see even leaders sometimes in Nepal from time to time talk about reopening some of the very fundamental issues of the constitution. There is the question of federalism, of secularism. So I don't really know what the future holds, but as far as India is concerned, the government of Nepal is working within the context of the constitution, and we are fully supportive of that process. As I said, one doesn't know what will happen in the future.
Yeah. So let's move to another part. Like you have mentioned a lot about how the relation between Nepal and India can be improved. You have made a list of recommendations. As we understand, like India has very intimate yet troubled relation with Nepal, and it's been like this all the time. So a section of critics in Kathmandu blame that New Delhi's interference in Nepal's internal affairs as the main reason behind this kind of situation. But however, the recommendation that you have made, to improve our bilateral relations does not mention anything about this. So what is your take on this? Does this mean that India has never interfered in internal affairs, or, what is your observation on this?
So, India has been very deeply involved in Nepal. And this is not something new. It's ever since India became independent. You remember Nepal was ruled by a Rana autocracy. In 1950, there was a Delhi agreement under which there was some power sharing between the Ranas and the political parties. Similarly, India supported, the anti-panchayat agitation for multi-party democracy in 1989, 1990. You yourself referred to the peace process that brought the Maoists on board. The Madhesi agitations were also, the resolution of those agitations was facilitated by India. So India has been very, very deeply involved. And if you look at India's involvement historically, you will see that India has always supported the aspirations of the Nepalese people for political emancipation, for social and economic inclusion. So over the decades, you can see how Nepal has transformed politically from an autarky to a non-party panchayat system to multi-party democracy to a more inclusive society. And, we have been closely associated with each of these major developments. And obviously, our involvement has meant that the ruling elites of the day have been unhappy. For instance, during the panchayat period, many of the political leaders, in fact, the father of Nepalese democracy, V.P. Koirala, were in exile in India. And so if you read the writings and reports of the panchayat period, everybody said that, India is supporting these, they are anti Nepal people, terrorists, they're Indian agents, and things like that. So, to a certain extent, this feeling within the elite community in Nepal, I can understand. But I personally feel that history will judge India's involvement as positive, because it has, helped in Nepal transform itself into the society and country it is today. So I don't want to call it interference. Interference is a much more it's like micromanagement, that on every issue we are involved and, we are interfering and stuff like that. And I don't think that is the policy that we should follow. It's possible that, it depends so much on individuals associated with the policy, on how they behave, how they act. So I think our involvement, to me at least, appears to be on the positive side, but this should not imply micromanagement and interference. Also, sometimes this is not only because of what India is doing or saying, it's also because of requests that we get from the Nepalese side. So, it becomes a two-way street. And of course, given the asymmetry in size between Nepal and India, it always makes good politics for politicians to talk about, India's big brotherly attitude and interference and micromanagement. So, politically that sells. So I can understand that. And of course, that is something we have to factor into the manner in which we conduct our diplomacy in Nepal.
Yeah, you just, helped me remind one particular case in which you had mentioned then Home Minister talking to you about, the appointment of, police chief. And then he had to refute, maybe amid pressure in social media, like he drew criticism. So what do you think? Why does this happen, that the political party, even for the, simple kind of decision, they often, sometimes seek advice?
I referred to two separate incidents, and the Home Minister who had actually spoken to me was also a very good friend of mine. Unfortunately, he passed away, and I think the Nepalese media mixed up the two incidents. So I think sometimes this happens because politicians are also very lonely at the top, and they really can't share their ideas and thinking openly with many of their colleagues. And I think, it depends on the kind of credibility that you develop. If they feel that you are also, very deeply committed to, strengthening the relationship between the two countries, between the two police services, the intelligence, etc. So you have a lot of informal discussions and understandings. So sometimes, this is it's normal part of your political engagement, your diplomatic engagement. So I don't think this is anything exceptional. Of course, in Nepal, a lot is made, out of this. But, this really depends on the relationship that you establish with your interlocutors and the kind of credibility and trust that you have.
Yeah, thank you. Now let's go a little beyond Nepal, and let's see from the South Asian perspective. So, China, which India considers its strategic rival in the region, appears to enjoy more favorable opinion among people in most of India's neighbors. However, this appears just the opposite in case of India, despite the fact that India has been lending its support all the while. For example, India was the first respondent when it came like earthquake, and even in Sri Lanka, India is helping to bail out its economic crisis that it is facing recently. And also in Bangladesh, India has done a lot. But then why this is actually happening? So what do you think are the factors behind such a situation? Does this mean India's neighborhood first policy not paying off that much?
Well, it's a very interesting question. And, as I was saying earlier, China has changed and China is much more assertive. China is much richer. So it can roll out these, hundreds of billions of dollar programs under the Belt and Road Initiative. And economically, China is very mighty. And most countries, not only South Asian countries, but all countries in the world see huge economic opportunities from collaborating and cooperating with China. So to some extent, it's natural Chinese involvement. Secondly, in South Asia, for instance, India is the overarching factor in South Asia, whether it's in terms of economic engagement, trade, whether it's in terms of the cultural and the people-to-people connections. So India is the overarching factor. And if you look at the whole region, in a sense, India is the glue that binds all of South Asia together. Every country of South Asia has a much stronger relationship with India than it has with the other countries in the neighborhood. So India is a very strong and dominant presence in South Asia. And so some of the countries of South Asia feel, somewhat, I've used this phrase before, they think it's like a claustrophobic embrace. And so they want to diversify their relations, they want to diversify their trade, and they're also looking for, some other countries to balance India's role, influence, presence. And you'll see that, in the past, sometimes it used to be the United States of America. These days, it's China. So this kind of game, goes on constantly. And naturally, when India and China relations are at such a low ebb, given what is happening on the India-China boundary, clearly Chinese involvement and activities in our neighboring countries then raise a lot of interest and concern in India. And that is, I think that is natural. But what I'm trying to say is that, some of this also depends on the state of India-China relations. So if India and China relations improve, then perhaps you look at Chinese involvement in the neighborhood through somewhat different eyes. When India-China relations are at a very low ebb, then you look at Chinese involvement in South Asia slightly differently. So I think, this is something that India has to be very conscious about. And you referred to regional cooperation. So one of the other factors that worries me is that South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation is more or less as some people say, on a ventilator. And, no summit level meetings have been held. And what we are now seeing is that subgroups of South Asia are being established. There is one that has been established under Chinese auspices. So I think regional cooperation is extremely important. And if there is a vacuum in regional cooperation, then, we will have new types of cooperation emerging. And this is naturally something that India needs to be very conscious about and monitor carefully.
Yeah, so you mentioned about the SARC. In fact, SARC is already, it's a moribund organization. In fact, it's not actually working. And now you rightly mentioned it's in coma. But yes, even as this SARC is not there, many people, many commentators, they actually argue that I think India, since it's an economic giant in the region, in terms of economy, in terms of other things as well. So they kind of argue that India should further increase, economic cooperation and sub-regional connectivity in order to offset growing influence of China and also to improve its own relation with its small neighbor. So what do you think about this suggestion? Has there any improvement in this front on the part of...
let's leave China aside for the moment. I mean, I think a very important element of the neighborhood first policy that you referred to is regional economic connectivity. It is strengthening the economic engagement among South Asian countries. Right now our trade within South Asia is a mere 7% of our total trade. I mean, it's pathetic. So how do you do this? You do this by really stepping up your connectivity projects. And I must say a lot of work is being done in terms of rail connectivity, in terms of establishing integrated checkposts, in terms of road connectivity and development of infrastructure. So a lot of work is happening. I would refer to also development of railways. For instance, the survey work on the Birganj-Kathmandu railway, I believe, is underway. So connectivity is absolutely critical. And once you have this connectivity, I think the logistics of trade within our region will improve significantly. Secondly, if you look at Nepal in particular, I think hydropower cooperation is absolutely essential to create this, regional economic integration or economic interdependence or what have you. I mean, Nepal has a huge hydro potential. It's clean, green energy. India, Bangladesh, for instance, have huge appetites for energy. So there is no reason why India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan can be connected through a sub-regional electricity grid. We've been talking about this for a long time, and it is a work in progress, and, considerable headway is being made. But I think we need to speed up this process of regional integration. And I hope very much that, with this economic interdependence being strengthened, economic integration happening, I think the politics will also follow, and it will have a very, positive effect on the political relationship between the countries. So I think the neighborhood first fundamentally is, stepping up efforts for this sub-regional economic integration.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So it's always good to read a book written by a diplomat because there's experience, so much of experience, unlike the books written by a scholar. We actually rely on secondary sources. So do you have any plan to write any further books on India or any South Asian countries?
Well, my publisher has been asking me. So I got a call from my editor saying, why don't you start working on your second book? So I'm still thinking about it because it's a lot of, this book on Nepal, Kathmandu Dilemma, was really in my mind. So it was, and as I said in my introduction, it's not a scholarly work. It's my view about how we saw, developments in Nepal and so on. But if I write a next book, it'll clearly have to mean a very detailed research. And of course, if I write something, it will be focused on our region, countries I'm familiar with, whether it's Nepal or Bhutan. or somewhat broader South Asian issues. But I'm still thinking about it, and let's see if I have a second book in me.
We look forward to reading that book. And thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your time. And it's a pleasure for me to have you again second time. Thank you so much. Over to you, John.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you both for this wonderful conversation. Mr. Koirala, for your sharp questions. Ambassador Rae, for all of your insights into the manner of India's engagement with Nepal, India's relationship with its neighbors, and the role that connectivity can play in fostering more constructive political relationships. If you decide to write a second book, please let us know. We would be very happy to host it here on the book show.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.